want to take you back to a point I made very early in the course. Philosophy tries to clear up the rational part of ethical decision-making. And once we get to Kant, he wants to convince us of two things. First, the highest principle of morality comes from reason, not from experience. Second, unethical choices are actually irrational. That is, they're self-contradictory. Kant discusses this point on page 37 if you want to read what he says about it. He wants to distinguish between two different kinds of contradictions, but we're not going to worry about that distinction. We just need to grasp his main point, and that point comes out of his first discussion of the four cases. He wants to say, for example, there's something self-contradictory about lying to borrow money, because if we universalize that maxim, we would create a world where borrowing money would be impossible. Borrowing asks other people to trust us. But in this hypothetical world we're creating, no one would trust anyone to pay back a loan, so no one would lend anyone money. Notice the important point is that the contradiction is between the maxim on one hand and the universal law on the other. If I create a world where my maxim of borrowing under false pretenses becomes a universal law that everyone else follows, then it becomes impossible to live by my maxim. My maxim involves choosing to borrow, but that choice becomes impossible. This is a point that is absolutely essential for us to understand if we want to apply Kant's ethical principle, because testing a maxim depends on being able to see whether a self-contradiction happens when we universalize the maxim and create a hypothetical world where everyone follows that maxim. So in the paper, when you're applying Kant, you're checking to see if this kind of contradiction happens in the case of one or more of your options. Once you convert an option into a maxim and then universalize the maxim, you turn the rule that you're living by into a rule that everyone else lives by. Is it still possible to live by that rule yourself? If no, then it's unethical. So let's practice that with two examples that I think make the point really clear. Whenever there's something I want to possess, I will steal it. Okay, that's my maxim. I'm going to try to live by that maxim. I want what I want, and this seems like an effective way of getting it. Why wouldn't I do this? Well, one reason might be that I would probably eventually get caught. But Kant insists that probably doesn't get us to a universal ethical law. That would make stealing a hypothetical imperative, not a categorical one. I'm not stealing either because it wouldn't work. This is not a good problematic hypothetical imperative, or because it would not lead to happiness. It's not a good assertoric hypothetical imperative. But what if I could find a way I would never get caught? Or what if I lived in a society where stealing is tolerated and even celebrated? Would I still be wrong? If not, then it's not an ethical issue in the first place. It's just a cultural practice. We don't steal other people's stuff because that's not accepted in our society. But for Kant, the only way to see if we have an ethical issue is to run his decision procedure. Take the maxim, turn it into a universal law, and then look at the hypothetical world that we've created in our imagination and still see if we could still live out that maxim in a world like that. Okay, let's try that with the maxim of stealing. Turn it into a universal law. Whenever anyone wants something someone else has, they will steal it. On its surface, the universal law doesn't appear to contradict itself. It doesn't appear to be irrational. It would probably cause a lot of problems in society, but that doesn't necessarily make it self-contradictory. But I have to ask myself, what is it exactly that I'm willing or intending in my maxim? I'm stealing because I want to own something. I want to possess it. I want to have it as my property. I want it to be mine and not belong to anyone else. Would that be possible in the world that I'm creating by turning that maxim into universal law. Well, in that world, how would property function? One person would get something. Great, I've got my Rolls-Royce. Yay! Now, not everyone wants a Rolls-Royce, but plenty of people think that their lives would be better if they had one. And so as soon as I get hold of my Rolls-Royce, someone else steals it. Now, in that world, property doesn't mean anything. Nothing is actually mine, because as soon as I get it and someone else wants it, which is inevitable, they'll just take it. So I can never actually effectively own anything. And so, in my hypothetical world, where I universalize my maxim of stealing, my original maxim becomes impossible. I literally cannot will it. Will it means mobilizing every means that are within my power. But there are no means that are within my power to make something mine, to really own something. So the maxim contradicts itself. I'll do just one more example to make sure you get the idea. Let's say that I want to be a leader. A lot of people want to be president of the United States, arguably the most powerful person in the world. Would it be okay if I'm Mike Pence to murder Donald Trump so that I can be president? Well, I'd probably get caught and put in prison and not be able to be president for very long. But that's not the point for Kant. That's not the contradiction. That has to do with consequences. Kant thinks we should focus on intentions. That's the point about ethical principles being universal and necessary. Probably won't cut it. What if I could be really skillful and kill Mr. President in a way that I'm not caught? Would there still be a problem? So let me see if I can make a maxim that is broad enough to cover different situations, but still narrow enough to be meaningful and to let me see whether it's right or wrong. So I'll try this one. Whenever I'm pursuing a goal and someone gets in my way, I'll kill them. Now universalize the maxim. Whenever anyone is pursuing a goal and someone gets in their way, they will kill them. Now that sounds like a pretty violent, unpleasant world to live in, but that's not the problem Kant sees about it. Would it be possible to carry out my own maxim in a world like that? Well, what would happen if everyone followed this maxim? Well, I'd be president. There'd be a big inauguration ceremony. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would swear me in front of a huge crowd. There'd be lots of parties all over Washington, D.C. But right at that moment when I'm being sworn in, Michelle Obama, who's sitting next to me on the stage, thinks to herself, that looks pretty cool. I think I'd like to be president. She grabs the Bible from the Chief Justice, whacks me on the back of the head with it. Now, she looks pretty strong. She hits me at the right angle. Bang, she's president. Now, surely when I said I wanted to be president, I meant for more than a few seconds. Give me a minute to enjoy this thing. But in the world I created by universalizing my maxim, I can become president, but I can't actually be president for more than a few seconds, which means that I can't will my maxim. It's in my power to become president, but that wasn't really my goal. To go down in history as the shortest serving president. People would say, well, President Wilson at least didn't stumble over the Oval Office, and he was wearing a great suit. But that's all he accomplished. Now, I think Michelle would probably make a better president than I would, but that's not the point. The point is that my maxim can't be ethical for Kant because it contradicts itself once I universalize it. I can't will a world where that maxim is universalized. So it fails the decision procedure. I think I better just vote for Michelle. That maxim probably won't contradict itself. I'll keep teaching philosophy and let other people be president, at least for now, at least until I can find an ethical way of reaching my goal. So this is the way that Kant wants us to think a decision all the way through. And that's the kind of thinking that you're going to be doing in your own paper with the decision that you decide to focus on.